I've spent the past week using the brand new M2 MacBook Air as my only computer. And team, I gotta tell you, I have some serious opinions about it. First off, the version of the MacBook that I've been using is this one, my cheapest base model that I personally purchased. Apple let me borrow a MacBook Air, but I've only used that in the unboxing video. Everything I've actually done with an M2 MacBook Air has been on this midnight 256GB model. The only exception being the B-roll for this video is on the Starlight version because, as we'll see, there's some things I don't like about this one. And let's start there. If this is your first time hearing about the M2 MacBook Air, let's quickly cover the specs and ordering options because there is a bit more variety this year as opposed to the M1 MacBook Air. And if you want to skip this, you can go to this timestamp. The base model version comes in at $1199. For that money, you'll get the 8-core M2 processor, 8-core GPU, 8GB of unified memory, and a 256GB solid-state drive. You can add more memory, storage, and even add 2 cores to the GPU, all for around $100 a pop to $200 a pop. You can take this all the way up to 24GB of unified memory and a 2TB solid-state drive on top of that 10-core GPU, and that maxed out version will cost $2499. And that's pretty darn pricey, especially when you start considering that you're now in the MacBook Pro 14 scenario. For $2399, you could get a MacBook Pro 14 with 10-core M1 Pro processor, 14-core GPU, 1TB of storage, and 16GB of unified memory. There is a bit of size difference between the two machines, and here it is. This is the MacBook Pro 14, and yes, it is obviously bigger and bulkier, but in reality, I thought there would be a bigger difference between the two. Yes, the 14 is slightly bigger, and you can feel that extra heft if you hold them both at the same time, but when do you hold two computers at the same time? I mean, you're not really going to be able to tell the difference if it's in a backpack, and if you have it on a desk, why would you care about the weight? So you've really got to love the aesthetics of this specific MacBook Air to want to get one. And frankly, so that I don't leave this as just implied, the aesthetics are amazing, and that's actually the first thing that I've liked in the past week of use. I absolutely love how this laptop looks and feels to use. I can't remember a laptop of this size that has felt more, I don't know how else to say it, but substantial in recent memory. I've used Razer Blade 13s and 14s, Dell XPSs, other Apple laptops, and a whole host of random Dell Latitudes for my day job. This computer is awesome to use. I don't know that I would say that it's been fun to use because who has fun at work, but physically speaking, there is almost nothing that I dislike. This looks strikingly like a mini version of those latest M1 Pros 14 and 16s. It's a darn tiny thing that fits in roughly the same spaces as a 12.9-inch iPad Pro, and to have a full laptop in that kind of a spot with this kind of capabilities, that's really crazy to think about. I believe Apple's done a fantastic job in redesigning the Air to meet their current design standard. This seamlessly fits into the look of the new iPhone, iPads, and Macs. But love fest aside, when it comes to the finish and design, there is something that I don't like. I really don't like the midnight finish. I love how it looks, but because of how it attracts fingerprint smudges, it's kinda meh. It's not razor blade bad. I think those Razer laptops are the standard, not in a good way, for how bad a piece of technology can go from looking great to downright messy just from picking it up. But the midnight finish is bad enough to notice and easily the worst I've ever seen on an Apple computer. I mean, look at it right here. We only just barely touched this thing and you can already see the fingerprints all over this. It's so bad that I'll probably return this specific laptop to get a Starlight version. Again, side note, the MacBook Air Apple is letting me borrow is that color, and I think it looks fantastic. And look, right now, hold on, we gotta wipe this off. I brought a microfiber cloth with me because I knew we'd have to clean this off in use. And I'm sad here because I really wanted to like the darker, more pro-looking body. But even on the best days, I have oily skin, and if something shows fingerprints, I will be leaving my mark, and I don't want that in a laptop. The next thing that I've liked has been the power. The M2 is absolutely an upgrade over the M1 in a lot of ways. Number one being it's straight up better in single and multi-core performance while having the same number and array of cores. And that's pretty impressive stuff, being able to go from an already impressive score to even better. But there are other improvements that make the M2 way better for me personally that I've really liked. The media encoder that's been borrowed from those higher end M1 Pro processors lets the M2 MacBook Air punch way above its weight class in the video editing department. Yes, I know not everybody is a content creator, but I, Gary, know two things: project management and creating YouTube videos. and I've had enough computer processing power for project management for like 20 years now. A video oriented around me doing project management work would just be me sitting at a desk on Teams for 8 hours a day. That's boring. Seriously, this and the M2 MacBook Pro 13 are easily able to handle even the worst kinds of video codecs that I use on a near daily basis, and there really isn't anything else in the market that can do what this can do at this size and price point. I've said this before, but for the video files and codecs that I use on the Everyday Dad and in other projects, these bring my very expensive Windows PC to a halt. I'm pointing to it. It's through that wall right there. My 5950X and 3080 Ti build cannot run these files as seamlessly as this $1,200 laptop. I'm sorry, but I continue to be impressed by that. Because of that encoder, you don't even really tax the system at all when in use. So you never really have to worry about the thermal issues when editing, or most importantly when rendering. For gaming, I don't really play too many games, but what I do play has been fine. For example, I mainly play WoW Classic and an assortment of roguelike indie games, all of which were handled perfectly well by the M2, and honestly they were handled perfectly fine by the M1 as well. The laptop did get hot during my WoW gaming session, but we're really starting to cross into the not intended use case for a computer that only has a passive cooling system. If gaming is your priority, I would say don't get a Mac, but if you insist, I would say get a Mac with a fan. Will the computer thermally throttle? Over the last week, I've seen like 1,000 YouTube videos talking about this. In my experience, yes and no. It's actually a weird scenario. When running Cinebench, which if you don't know is a test that can max out the CPU for the duration of its multi-core test, when you do this, you can watch the score go lower each pass with significant score differences between the different 10-minute sessions. However, when having the system's thermal log up, there is no notification of a thermal issue, which is really weird. I used to see those thermal issue notifications quite often during throttling on the older Intel MacBooks. So it's clear the system is slowing down as the computer warms up, but is it doing it before actually hitting some kind of a thermal cap that triggers a response to keep from technically thermally throttling to protect the insides? I don't know. I'm not an engineer from Apple's SoC team. What I can say definitively though is if you run very strenuous benchmarks back to back, the system will score lower over time. Are you somebody that runs extensive benchmarks as your day job? Okay, well, that's probably important to you. For the rest of us, The good news is that in all of my regular use situations and even in my video editing tasks, the CPU never even came close to hitting the cap. You have to try to make this thing throttle to get it to actually throttle. And while we're on the controversy train, here's something that I neither like nor dislike, but if I don't mention it, I'll get called a shill. But because I'm not threatening to throw my laptop in the garbage can right now, I'm gonna get called a shill anyway, but the SSD situation. In the M1 MacBooks at the cheapest 256GB model, you had two 128 chips providing that 256GB of storage. On the M2 model, Apple has included a single 256GB chip for whatever reason. Apparently, this will lead to about a 40% slower read and write speed between the generations. I say apparently because personally, when I run the test between my M1 Air and my M2 Air, there really isn't a difference. However, I am willing to accept that my M1 Air might have a problem because there have been other folks on the internet that have seen this happen. But personally, I can't recreate this no matter how hard I try. What I'm not gonna say is that you won't notice a difference. I can't even get the difference to show up, so I'm not gonna talk down to you and tell you not to worry. If SSD speed is your #1 priority, you should at least look at the 512GB model. I say I neither like or dislike this because for me personally, it hasn't been an issue at all. Even on my more expensive Macs that have way faster solid-state drives, I do everything in my professional life from an external server. That external server has literally half the read and write speeds of the internal SSDs on the M2 MacBook Air. No joke, half, and it's never held me back. The reason the cheapest MacBook Air is going to feel sluggish with a lot of things open is because of that 8GB of unified memory. macOS, even at the best of times, takes up about 4GB of active memory. While typing the script for this video, I checked my memory usage, and just from having Google Docs and the macOS email client open, I'm running at 6GB. I'm even willing to say, sure, maybe the swap memory will be slightly slower because of the slower solid-state drive. Hey, video editing Gary here, and I wanna highlight this point because it's really important. nobody really knows how the swap memory works. Yes, we know that swap memory is essentially virtual memory, and it uses your storage system as kind of a fake active memory. Like, computers have been doing that forever, but we don't know technically how Apple does it, because if you try to find a white paper or some other kind of technical documentation, at least in my research, I can't find it. So anybody that says they know exactly how swap memory works and how a slower SSD would affect that, I mean, a lot of that is just guesswork. If you were at Apple and you know this stuff, please let me know in the comments below. I would love to get the white paper for how swap memory works. Okay, I gotta get back to editing this. You get back to watching it. But using swap memory is not how the system wants to work. That's not how any computer wants to work. They want to use the unified memory or RAM or whatever their active memory is called. So if you are somebody that needs a ton of tabs open or a ton of programs open at once, you shouldn't be getting 8 gigabytes of unified memory or 8 gigabytes of RAM on any computer. That's not an M2 problem, that's a computer problem. Swap memory is a band-aid to keep your computer operating smoothly if you, the user, bought too little for your intended purposes. It's the icing on a cake. It's not the whole cake. Okay, back to things that aren't middle gray. Another thing that I've really liked has been the keyboard. I noticed on Twitter that this had been getting flack for other sets of reasons, but I've found the keyboard to be pretty darn good. I like that they increased the size of the actual keyboard so you get a full-size escape key and full-size function keys this time around. I've typed several scripts from the laptop's keyboard, including this one, and while I am kind of a mechanical keyboard snob at my work desk, for a laptop keyboard, I think these feel great to type with. Something that I don't think gets brought up enough in Apple laptop videos is these keyboards might not be the snappiest. I mean, it's not like they have Holy Panda switches in them or anything, but they are incredibly easy to get into a typing rhythm. And I find that to be the most important aspect of any keyboard. Even if I love my fancy keycaps and the clack of a good tactile switch, if it's sluggish or awkward to type and get going, I just won't use that big mechanical keyboard. I was worried about the uniformity of the body of the laptop compared to the previous Air's wedge shape, but because of how thin this laptop is, I haven't had a single problem with the edges. I absolutely dislike typing on my MacBook Pro 16 for long periods of time because the edge of the laptop really just digs into my forearms. But in a few several-hour typing sessions on the M2 Air, I haven't even gotten a single mark. This is very comfortable to type with. Okay, let's get into something that I don't dislike, but I actively hate. This computer has Thunderbolt 3, where the Pro computers, the 14s and the 16s, all have Thunderbolt 4. When it comes to transfer speeds of both data and power, you won't notice much of a difference. And I hate this because it means the M2 standard, much like the M1 standard, will only export out to a single display. I've been complaining about this for 2 years now since the original M1s came out, and I get a ton of pushback for this. But in real, usable scenarios, again, let's put on my project manager hat, most offices that I've been to have a dual screen setup. Yes, I know there are hacks to get additional displays, but I can't make a recommendation to thousands of people with a hack in mind, especially when I've seen things that the hacks can cause problems with computers. So if the OEM says one monitor, I'm gonna say one monitor. Most of the folks that I know during, and some still are, working from home, they purchased 2 monitor setups for their home offices to be more like our work offices. My wife today uses a dual monitor setup for her work and for her schooling. I feel like it's this weird Twitter, YouTube bubble where everybody just gets a single gigantic monitor or an ultra wide, and they think that that's the representative use. Sure, Apple doesn't market the M2 MacBook Air as a quote unquote pro laptop, but why are you buying this if not for work? Plus, there are Windows laptops that cost half as much that do at least dual displays out. Intel integrated graphics can handle at least 2 displays, but this computer that easily handles my tough graphical needs can't do it. I consider that to be an actual purchase decider right there, no matter how many folks comment or tweet at me to tell me that I'm crazy. Look, I know I'm crazy, but I'm not crazy about this. The next major thing that I've liked has been the updated display. It doesn't have the same kind of wow factors we're used to from the legit mind-boggling displays on those bigger and more expensive MacBooks, but from an upgrade perspective, model to model, I think this is awesome. When I pined for a larger 14-inch MacBook a few years ago, I think this is really what I was hoping for. There is a ton of usable screen real estate, especially for a computer that could easily be mistaken for a tablet. Also, that extra brightness makes it so much easier to see in mixed lighting or outside in the sun, and that's really nice because that was a pretty big thing that I did not like from the 400 nit panel that the M1 MacBook Air has. Sure, the notch exists, but I feel like we don't have to mention that this time around because everybody is so angry about the SSDs, nobody had the time to make a clickbait notch video to rile everybody up, so hey, silver linings and rain clouds, right? The camera is also something that I neither like nor dislike. It just needed to be updated. I do consider Apple kind of late to the game here by only now starting to update these, and this one's fine, but it's not even that great either. And it shouldn't take until 2022 to get an updated camera in here. You gotta start focusing more on these because it is important for folks working from home. The speakers, they're okay. Maybe they are better than the M1, but I'm not really an audiophile. They sound perfectly good to me, but they definitely don't sound as good as the bigger MacBooks. Battery life has also continued to be great. 18 hours, Apple says, and I believe them. All of the greatness we talked about earlier with power and usability, you get all of that for 18 hours without being plugged into the wall. I'm still impressed by that number 2 years later. If you aren't, I don't know what else to tell you. That's like the single thing that makes the new M1 computers just so valuable is you don't even really need to think about the battery life anymore. All right, all that aside, do I recommend the M2 MacBook Air? I don't know. Like I said earlier, I feel like this sits in a weird spot in the Apple lineup. If you are looking for the cheapest MacBook, which is why folks generally buy the MacBook Air, Apple still sells the M1 Air for almost $400 less if you buy refurbished. That's not peanuts or a small amount of money. That's like 1/3 less the cost for functionally almost the same thing. I think from a real practical, noticeable difference, you are paying for the screen, the media encoder, and I guess MagSafe charging? Is that worth $400 to you? Maybe. But if you do want to start upgrading this thing to make it more usable, you're again going to bump into that refurbished or even brand new MacBook Pro 14, which is absolutely superior in every way minus size and battery life. But will you actually notice the size difference in use? And will you notice a 1-hour battery life difference? Again, maybe, but there are so many benefits for the 14-inch. Personally, I would be willing to make that leap. I don't want to take anything away from the M2 MacBook Air. This is an awesome laptop, and I've had a ton of fun using it, and I will continue using it over the coming months, but it's just kind of hard to give it the same blanket recommendation that I gave the M1 MacBook Air. And if you like this video, hit that subscribe button, then click here to see all of my favorite accessories for the M2 MacBook Air. Click, 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 click. Thanks for watching.